Welcome to Sullivan Street, where we have a very special guest today, James Campion. But first, let's say good afternoon to my co-host, Chris Miggs. Chris, what do you think about today?
Today's good. Actually, just as we're recording this, I think they announced that Counting Crows are going to be on the Jesse Malin tribute record, which is a great cause. And if anyone is listening who hasn't heard of Jesse Malin, you should go check that out. I think it's coming out in a couple months, but very excited. Actually, I don't think they've announced yet what the track list is, what Counting Crows song they played. But Jesse Malin, a wonderful New York musician who had a really kind of tragic physical issue over the last year. A spinal stroke that's basically prevented him from performing, and there's been a lot of work done for him. And this tribute album is coming out shortly. A lot of other great people on the album too. Bruce Springsteen. The first song that was released was by Bleachers. I think Lucinda Williams is on it. It's a murderer's row, but thankfully Counting Crows as well, because Imi was a member of Jesse Malin's band for a period of time. I actually saw them together maybe 2021, I think, at City Winery. But yeah, anyway, that's the news for the day. I don't have much else to
Yeah, and I had one other news, but I think this will tie into one of the things I'm going to ask James about, which is that someone put on Reddit today that a video was released by Fantastic Cat. The song is called "So Glad You Made It," and it features Adam prominently in the video and in the song, and a lot of sha-na-nas, which we were just talking about how great that is, because I do want to talk about Adam guesting on other songs. But let's get right into, wow, I'm so honored and was so happy when he decided to say yes to join the podcast. James Campion, who Counting Crows fans knows most prominently for being the co-host of the Underwater Sunshine podcast, also one of the leaders of the Underwater Sunshine Festival, working on a book about Counting Crows. Renaissance man, music journalist, author James Campion. James, thanks so much for joining us on the podcast.
Thank you both for having me. I am a fan of the show and the Counting Crows band, so this is a perfect opportunity for me to geek out with you guys on Counting Crows. Yes, thank you.
And I was wondering about that. I guess a little bit you can talk about how you met Adam, which I was trying to piece together. It seemed to be around 2008. But also, I didn't know for sure if you were a fan of the band before getting to know Adam really well. So maybe talk about that a bit.
I will. Yeah, just real quick, I want to shout out to Jesse Malin, a friend of the Underwater Sunshine Festival. He played it. He was on our podcast, owner of the Bowery Electric, where we host our festival nearly every fall. We did a couple at Rockwood. And also he owns the Berlin Club. Great singer-songwriter, as you guys mentioned, huge New York staple, almost like the little brother of Lou Reed. And we all miss Jesse very much, and much love out to him. And yes, the day that we're recording this, Fantastic Cat's record just came out, and I'll be going to their release party this evening. I might see Adam down there in Brooklyn, and he is on the video and sings on the single. So that's really cool. Fantastic Cat, also friends of the podcast, and they headlined the Underwater Sunshine Festival in 2022. So shout out to both of those guys.
Oh, cool. Thank you.
Okay, so my Counting Crows, I go all the way back to the first record. My girlfriend at the time had heard it in a record store. I was in a band at the time that did similar kind of lyric-centric music, and she ran home and was like, "You will love this." And she played it, and I did love it. And I remember her asking me through the first listen what Anna Begins is about. And I had a theory about it. And luckily, many years later, about 15 years later, I was able to ask Adam what it was about. And he told me the full story, which, in my time, as you guys know, I am working on a book with Adam that started in earnest in 2017. But prior to that, so I became a big fan right away. We used to get bootlegs of them. Went to see them, scalp tickets to see them front row for Recovering the Satellites in Jersey. It's the first time he sang the Springsteen song in the middle of Rain King. I remember that vividly. And around 1999, I got to know Lisa LaBar, who was running at that time a Counting Crows tribute site. Lisa now runs the Counting Crows website. And Lisa was a huge part of the Underwater Sunshine podcast. She used to post them all and deal with all the Spotify's of the world and all this other stuff. So she was great. She worked with me a lot in the post-production. I told her I wanted to send her my first published book, which is called Deep Tank Jersey, about the New Jersey club scene, to Adam. So I did. And I never heard That was the last time. So fast forward to, you're correct, Eric. I think in 2008, I was given the opportunity to interview Adam prior to the Sunday mornings, Saturday nights and Sunday mornings. Adam was doing I found out later on, a lot of independent papers as opposed to the Rolling Stones and the Spins of the world, who he felt kind of like were jerking Counting Crows around. And when he gave me the interview that day, I was chatting with you guys before we started the show, we both realized that we're around the same age and that our first record that we ever owned was Maybe Tomorrow by the Jackson 5. And from there on in, we dovetailed into a million subjects, to the point where the publicist finally had to get on the phone and be like, you guys have to stop. Because, you only usually get 15, 20 minutes, maybe a half hour with somebody. And this was like 2 hours into this conversation. So it was a great opening, salvo to our relationship. And during that conversation, he stopped in the middle and was like, wait a minute. You're the James Campion wrote Deep Tank Jersey? And I'm like, yes. He goes, oh, thank you for sending me that. But he remembered like 9 years later that he got this book from me and read it. And I was on cloud nine from that point. And I told him how much, the reason why I sent it to him is how much I listened to that first record while I was writing that book, and how much that, I wrote that book in 95, and on the shore, that's all they played was Mr. Jones and Round Here and Sullivan Street. And, the cover bands were playing it. So it was kind of nice to pay it back. So from that point on, Adam would always ask me to write pieces about Counting Crows when they had new records. So, the Somewhere Under Wonderland, and then this live thing they did in the interim. And I wrote pieces and did interviews with him, and each one seemed to be longer. So I think around 2016, 2015, I compiled all these, and through Lisa, I was able to get them, the transcripts to Adam. And he contacted me and said, what do you think of these? This is pretty cool. I'm like, well, I think there's a book there. So he's like, why don't you come down to my apartment and we'll just, hash it out. So I figured, I came down there with a whole treatment and a pitch, and I sat there and he quietly listened, didn't say anything. I had never met him before, like shook his hand and was in a room with him. It was always over the phone. It was always through email. And he was like, run tape. I'll never forget it. Like it was yesterday. He said, run tape. I had no questions, but I said, screw it. I'm like you two guys. I'm like every Counting Crows fans listening to this. I'm like, let's go. So we started, talking about Saturday Night Live, talking about, Maria, talking about, his situation. Now, I was about to mention to you guys prior, and this is a long answer, I know, I'm sorry. I tend to, if you listen to the podcast, you know that we go.
We love it.
That last thing I'll say is, Adam was the first, I believe I was the first journalist that Adam told me about his dissociative disorder. A piece came out in Rolling Stone about 2 months later, or maybe a month later. I don't know if they quoted from my piece. I can't remember what it was, but I remember him telling me right there that Saturday nights and Sunday mornings was very much a deep dive into that.
Yes.
And then as we worked on the book, we went back and we started to notice him too. Maybe for the first time, like there's stuff on Recovering the Satellites, which is supposed to be his I'm afraid of fame, or fame has not been what I thought, or like this is really scary. But it really was about, and he's talked about this publicly since, about people having a dissociative disorder and being out in the public eye and people knowing. I remember that first conversation we talked, and I don't want to give up too much of the book, but we talked about him being on the cover of Rolling Stone. And he said, absolutely not. I'm not doing it. And everybody's head exploded. Everybody in the band, his management, the record company. And his thoughts were, I'm going to be on, this is it. Like, I'm going to be on the cover of all these, they're going to know there's something wrong, and that was deep seated in the music, deep seated in his personality and how he saw himself through fame. And I was absolutely fascinated. Every conversation we had from there on in, which was about 3 hours every Thursday or Friday afternoon. And it would start, especially in the fall and winter, it would start and it'd be light out. And at the end, we forget to turn the lights on because he's got these beautiful windows all around his apartment. And you could see as it gets darker, he would kind of get darker and get deeper into some of his thoughts and things he was dealing with. And I would just be dead quiet, no follow-ups. I just let him go. And nobody, as you guys know, tells stories better than Adam. And to be 3 feet from him and listening to these stories. And that's why, I hope one day we finish this damn thing because everybody should read it. It's what I wanted, which is a portrait of an artist, and nobody gives more, in my estimation, in my experience, than Adam has. He's always painfully honest whenever he's speaking, and in his writing. So I am forever grateful for that, whether this book comes out or not. Just being in that room and being able to talk to him and ask him all those questions right from the beginning, without any kind of I need to know your credentials. I need to see what you're going to do. He just said, run tape. And from that moment on, we were working on the book.
What's interesting, I would say it's one of the things I think really works about recovering the satellites is that people say, oh, it's a record about fame or whatever. It's not really. It's about record about feeling disconnected from yourself. And it's, in Adam's case, the literal facts in 96 are about fame. But it could be about anything. It's the dissociative disorder, right? I mean, it's about filtering himself through there. And that could apply to lots of people for lots of different reasons in a lot of different ways. Whether I think that record's still, when we talked about that record, I think it holds up incredibly well, especially our current times. It's one of the records that really feels like current in a lot of ways. It's hard to describe exactly why, but it really just kind of connects to all these weird feelings. I think that the last 5-10 years have really brought out.
Yeah, and they were very brave. As everybody in the band will tell you, they did a right turn. First of all, they did a right turn when they made the first record after, their demos. There was a bidding war for their demos, which kind of sound like modern 80s rock music with gated drums and, effects on the guitars. Dave Bryson did such a brilliant job producing them that, as you guys know, bidding wars, then they get in there with T-Bone Burnett and they're like, we're not doing that. We're going to get rid of all the electric keyboards. We're going to get rid of all this stuff. We're going to get mandolins and, Hammond organs, and we're going to strip this thing down. And the band almost mutinied, but they had to hang in there. And they did a brilliant job creating Counting Crows. And then immediately in the second record, they become an alternative rock band for the 90s. And then they make another sharp turn and they put a live album out with 2 records. And then, and then they strip all these songs down for Storytellers or whatever it was that they were on. Or were they on Unplugged or one of those?
Storytellers.
Yeah, and they spent months and months, reconstructing those songs, reimagining those songs, rearranging those songs. And to me, that's bravery right out of the chute. And remember, these guys were not 21. Adam was 29 when he got signed. I believe all those guys were in the late 20s. They'd been in dozens of bands in the Oakland, Bay Area circuit. They had seen people come and go. And so they were right in the deep end right away as a band. And, Satellites is very, very underrated. And while I was working with Adam, I learned to really adore that record more than I have in the past.
It's funny that tension that you were just talking about the Rolling Stone cover. I mean, that goes back to Mr. Jones, which in a way might also go to the book that you're writing with him, which is that he wants to put himself out there in some ways and wants to be a star, but also knows that it increases the spotlight on him and kind of crystallizes things and dealing with the repercussions of putting yourself out there. Because, I'm sure he wants to leave a legacy, but then if he puts too much personal stuff, people could overanalyze it and this kind of thing. So.
Well, to his credit, he and I wanted it to be a Q&A like our interviews. That was the impetus for this.
Oh.
So he never wavered from that. Even my publisher didn't want to do it. They wanted me to work on a memoir. They did not. And I remember we were walking in the street one day to get something to eat. And I said, I remember because I was taping, I always ran tape. And I asked him, maybe you should write a memoir. And he goes, isn't that what this is? So he didn't want to just do something from I, me. He wanted it to be a discussion. And the really cool thing about it was, yes, it's taken us forever to finish this book. And I apologize to all the Counting Crows fans who are listening to James Campion right now and tell us, when the hell is this damn thing coming out? It's really up to Adam in a way because I finished my part. But my part's easy. That's his story. And so when he started working on the chapters in earnest with me as a writer, it became different than the Q&As because it became a legacy, like it's on paper. And because he's a lit major and he understands what that means, and he's a voracious reader, and he enjoys my work, and he's the first person to give me thumbs up or thumbs sideways if he doesn't think what I'm doing, he doesn't like it, and I value that, whether it's books I've written since we've met personally and professionally or anything else, that sometimes he would send me back after a chapter, just WHEW I would get in my email with the thing. So it's tough for him to go through this stuff and be that painfully honest, but that's what makes him him, and that's what makes Counting Crows so great for all of us who are fans. There's an unblinking quality. I wrote a book about Warren Zevon called Accidentally Like a Martyr. And I say in that book that Warren was an unblinking artist. He never looked at a subject and ever backed from it. Once he was in all the way. And I think that's true of Adam and Counting Crows.
Wow.
That's actually one of my favorite episodes of the podcast is one of the ones you guys did talking about all those Zevon songs. Because it really hones in on how devastating, like some of those songs, you listen to them. And this is what I loved about the podcast. I love to you guys talk about how you guys decided to do a podcast, but
Sure.
Diving into those songs, you really you guys both together kind of come at those songs from angles where it really lets you get deep. And like Zevon specifically, because you realize like, oh, these songs are devastating. Like if you're not like focusing on like exactly some of these details, these are wild and like emotional and heartfelt songs that if you like is pretty crazy. I think because you in the book you talk about like how that the daughter of the person the French inhaler is about. Sorry, it's the son, right?
Yes.
And that she still listens to that song, which is incredible. I mean, like that's one of the meanest songs ever written. One of the most beautiful, but like
Yeah, the mother of his son, Jordan, who's still a friend, and he was a great supporter of that book. And that's why the subtitle is The Tortured Art of Warren Zevon, he would say that she would listen to this song, and it's a devastating deconstruction and really teardown on every level, really horrifying. But it's so beautifully written, and he presents it so well that she would listen to it and drink, wine and just weep. That she's like, but it's so, Mom, why are you listening to it? It's just so beautiful. And that's that's what Jordan said to me about Warren's work. It's look at that crack in the sidewalk, but look, there's a flower growing through it. There's something in there. And yes, that was one of my favorite because it's when my book came out and he was helping me promote it, which was really endearing. But yeah, I think that's what we did best in that podcast, if I may say so myself, was when we really we stumbled on that Paul Simon record, Hearts and Bones, that he did after Simon & Garfunkel was supposed to do a record. And that's one of my favorites and one of his favorites. And until we started talking about it live to tape, we didn't know each one of us it was a favorite. There was a few moments like that in the podcast where I'm a huge fan of the Laws. He's a huge fan of the Laws. And Steve Lillywhite, worked on Hard Candy, and we were talking about that. And he goes, oh, when I got near Steve Lillywhite, I didn't ask him about U2. I asked him about, or the Rolling Stones. I asked him about the Laws. And then all of a sudden we were playing Laws songs. So that was the beauty of that podcast. It was very reminiscent of some of our afternoons when I would interview him. We would veer off into these discussions about film or music, other people's music. So yeah, that was the fun part of that.
How did you guys decide to do that? Was that coming out of the, I assume coming out of the interviews, but what sort of made you guys go like that? We got to do a podcast.
That was all Adam. That from the very beginning was all Adam's idea. So I stopped working with him early 2018, went back and started writing. I put in with him and, Counting Crows management to go on the road with them for a week in late August, early September of 2018, where that tour they went on with Matchbox 20. So I had already known I wanted to go on the road just to talk to the other guys, kind of see how they work, be there backstage, see them, the routines before they went on. And so, but from that period of late 2017, early 2018, I didn't talk to Adam. I figured I'm done. Let me run back, write so he sees I'm serious. Send him sections of, get the interviews transcribed, which I was sending to my assistant at the time. She was doing them in real time. So I started to gather them together in sections. His childhood, his influences, stuff about the first record, the second record, on and on, dissociative disorder, all these different things. Writing, his writing, his performing ideas, how he performs, how he gears up to perform. So I was doing that, and he just started calling me out of the blue. And he never did that even when we did, I would just email him. I was like, are we good for Friday at 2? Yes. End of story. And we would get together and then I wouldn't hear from him again for a week. Now all of a sudden he's calling me, he's like, hey, and I just got the feeling because towards the end we became very friendly. We'd watch basketball games together. We'd go to dinner together. I met his parents, his sister, his family's great, his friends, other musicians and artists would come over. I met Adam Schlesinger, the late great Adam Schlesinger from Fountains of Wayne at one of his events. When I say events, just people coming over to watch a movie, that I just think he missed our camaraderie, I would hope. And so he's like, let's do what we did, but do it as a podcast, but not about me and not about Counting Crows. Let's do it about the stuff that really jazzes me, because we would get off on these tangents about things we loved. And he knew that I was pretty steeped in music history and authorship and journalism. So we tried the first couple of them in mid-late January of 2018, and they were terrible. There's an interview with Adam that's on my YouTube page. He was on this TV show.
Yeah, I just watched that yesterday.
Yeah,
Where he said
and
that.
he
Yep.
goes, it was terrible, and I crack up every time I see that. But it's true. We both hated it, and we thought, what are we doing? We're trying to be broadcasters. Let's just do what we did. And if you listen to the very first one, I came to his apartment ready to go, and I had visited my kid at the time. My daughter was maybe in 4th or 5th grade, and at the time, I remember I was talking to all the kids, and this one kid was really sad. And I just asked him why. And he said, because I have to move next week. And I moved a lot as a kid. And I knew Adam moved all the time as a kid. So if you listen to that first podcast, I just brought it up and we were off and running. And then we started playing songs that reminded us of traveling and moving as a kid. And the rest is history. So, and we did 96 episodes and it ended with the pandemic. And as I was telling you guys before we started recording, it's been so hard between our schedules and my book writing and publishing and his music, and they've got new music coming out, and they had the new one in 2020, 2021, But a Miracle. So it's been really hard for us to get down to doing this because it's a lot of work. And, once we start, it's weekly. We would record 2 out of spate, and then we would, we start to compile them up in case they had to go on the road. But that's how the podcast started.
Yeah, thank you. I was just looking and just you kind of said it, but just to get the stats for those that don't know, as you said, over 2 years. So yeah, you recorded much more frequently than we did. In 1 year, we've had about 20 episodes. You from January 2018 to March 2020. You said 96. I saw 97. Either way, so almost 100. Chris had a question, but just because you were talking about Warren Zevon in your book in 2018, that the author of that Rain King book that came out, Jeff Harkness, he actually, we told him we were going to have you on, and he had one question. It actually had to do with that book. So just timely, I'll bring it up. He said that, first of all, he loved the book. And he said that, and he said, as you know, Adam Duritz did a cover of one of his songs.
Yes, he did.
Carmelita, right? Yeah. Yep. And he just said, as a journalist and as someone who knows both very well, what do you think they might share in common, either musically, artistically, personally, etc.?
Oh, wow, that's great. Great question. And I want to say this publicly. I do mean to read your book, buddy. Thank you for doing it, us Counting Crows fans, and I hope my book will also see the light of day. But very happy that you did it, and I definitely owe him a note. But anywho, getting back to Warren really quick and Adam said, I think in that podcast that Warren was a great influence on him. I did not know that until we started, and we talked about. He said he met him at the somewhere in LA.
The Viper Room when he was bartending.
The Viper Room, right? He met him at the Viper Room, and this was later in his career. And so he talked very efficient, and I quote him in my book. And I think the biggest. Adam likes the fact. See, I heard you guys talking about this in your inaugural episode. How the thing that makes Counting Crows songs so personal and so interesting is they do what all great songwriting is, and that is they're universal and personal. So by putting things like locations and women's names and things like that in there, it makes you feel like it not only happened, but it's happening to you. And that's what Warren did so beautifully. And he did it with LA. And I think that LA connection, because even though Adam grew up in the Bay Area and he grew up everywhere, as I mentioned, he moved to LA to kind of escape that early influx of, just incredible fame that came from that first record. But it also was a two-edged sword. There were a lot of people who were very negative towards him and would say stuff like, how come, you guys got signed? You're not as good as my band, or you're not, whatever. So, it was too much for Adam to hack. And it was, it was the guys who were down at the Viper Room, like Johnny Depp and those guys, who invited Adam to go down there and tend bar and hang out. And he embraced the LA scene to the point where he lived there for years and wrote beautifully about LA. So I remember, and I think I put it in the Zevon book, he said, the thing I love about Warren the most, and Taylor Goldsmith told me that from Dawes too, is that he's got this beautiful hangover, this, oh no, not another beautiful day in paradise, kind of like banality to it. And I hear that in some of the Counting Crows songs, specifically from This Desert Life on. You know, I know that Hard Candy's kind of the return to New York-y kind of record, but that's the beautiful thing about these Counting Crows records too, is that they have their geographies, And so I think that's the connection to answer that question.
Great.
Yeah.
Thanks
and
so
that
much.
kind of makes sense in this, and it's even interesting, even the House on the Hill thing, right? Because that Desert Life was made like a house on a hill looking down at the city. It's like Desperados Under the Eaves, sort of.
Yeah. Yeah. Everything, like say in a Long December is something that happened. But as Adam told me, it's never a memoir. It's never, getting back to him not wanting to write one, it's never a biography. He's not a reporter. So I know he hates this, comparing him to a poet, but there's a sense of real imagery and symbolism and metaphor in there. There's a way to say something that is interesting to the listener and also is important for him to sing because, the syllables and the way he's a singer and he's a great one and has sung in background vocals and he's sung in several bands of different styles and he appreciates great singers, soul singers. And so he writes to sing. The way I said earlier, I write to be read. I think about the audience. I think about who's reading this and what they're going to get out of it. And I think he does too. I think we have a little bit. I don't consider myself an artist. I think a writer is a craftsman. But I think that's one of the many things that he and I share that really connected us. Yeah.
Just because you brought that up, one thing that I don't think I've ever heard him. I've heard him talk about his songwriting, and his lyric writing, right? That maybe it's combination of natural talent, hard work, maybe things like studying English at Berkeley, all those kind of things, and so maybe certain parts of it that were in him as a kid. The one thing I've never heard him talk about is his because I think his singing ability is amazing, and in some ways I think unappreciated by the general public. Was he always a natural singer, or did he have to work a lot towards that, or a combination? Because I think that's one thing that's hard to maybe, get that right. Just like some people have a certain speaking voice, so in some ways you're given a certain singing voice, and I never heard him talk about that.
That's true. He tells us better than me, so I'll give you the general thing. He credits David Immergluck, his roommate at the time, and a guy who had been in Camper Van Beethoven and different bands, had kind of made it before him and kind of motivated him. He was recording something and he needed Adam to do vocals for it, and he pushed him and pushed him and pushed him. And he said, it was that night. And again, I'm butchering this story. And if Adam's listening to this, I apologize, buddy. Because I put it in the book and the way he describes it is fantastic. Just going for it. And he became, at least if he didn't become a singer, I might be too dramatic here, but if he didn't become a singer that night during that 2, 3, 4 hour session, he understood what he needed to do to develop that thing. But if you listen to the Himalayas stuff, you listen to Sordid Humor, you listen to any of that early stuff, Adam had those chops. He played for me several early things that he did. He worked for a studio. He worked like setting up equipment in a studio in the Berkeley area, and they would give him time. Some of the bands would come in to sing. He was humming melodies, and they're like, "Why don't you sing a melody over this?" And he sent me those tapes, and you listen to those. And you hear the origins of this guy. You hear him develop. So yes, it's a combination. The answer to that question is a combination, in my estimation. And again, he'd have to answer this, and he does in my book, in our book, that there is a combination of really discovering it, developing it. And I love the fact that he always says he likes to keep the mistakes in there. He doesn't go for the perfection. He likes those happy accidents. And it's funny because he pointed out to me where there are accidents, like pitchy accidents and little things, and I would never notice in a million years. But then once you hear it, like the edit in Strawberry Fields, you can never unhear it. But it just goes to show you that I would much rather hear that in a song. And you could say this about hundreds of artists, especially in the rock and roll idiom, that you go for that feel. I just read Barbra Streisand's memoir, which is brilliant. And she always, to me, when I was a kid, was the pristine singer, like perfect pitch, all those things. And she said she really struggled with that in the studio. And because she was a perfectionist, she felt like her first couple of records, she was trying to be perfect. And then she discovered that later. Same with Aretha. Aretha didn't know what the hell she was doing there in Columbia. They misused her. They tried to make her a torch singer. But then once she got to Atlantic and started singing from her soul and playing the piano with it, she became Aretha. Same with Sam Cooke. There's so many stories about that. And Adam was no different, for sure.
All right, great. Thank you. Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. That's what I thought. So going back to the podcast, we're kind of good co-hosts in this way, which is that Chris told me that he listened to every episode, which I didn't know, and I listened to. I'm
Wow.
a huge podcast guy, but just I have so many podcasts I listen to. I listen to, I want to say like 10 to 12. So what I would like you to do for those Crows fans like me that only listened to a couple or maybe didn't listen to it all, now that we have you on, let's get them listening. What are a couple episodes that you that either love doing or you think that Chris fans would love, and maybe Chris can comment on them as well.
Okay, that's a good idea. All right, let's do that. All right, so right off the top of my head, I know you dropped this in an email, and I completely forgot to think about it. So this is off the top of my head. I always say we did the first big one we did blowing up, I think, was the 4 or 5 part series we did on punk music in the 70s. That was really fun to do. And Adam did his yeoman's job researching that. And I knew a lot of that stuff, but I learned stuff. We both said when we were done, every episode, we both learned something from each other, which was kind of really cool, especially coming from him. And I loved this is only because it's a memory. I have a memory of coming to his place, setting up the equipment as I always did. We kept the microphones in there, but I brought the recorder and I would set up, get our water. He'd have his laptop and all his research. But at this time, he just looks up at me and goes, "You want to do a series of podcasts on Rod Stewart and Ron Wood?" And I'm like, "Yes, I do." And we sat down and we did it. It was like a 3-part series from like the late 60s all the way through the Faces to the last things that they did together. And man, that was fun. It was just totally off the top of our heads. So there's those. And then there's the ones like the punk one where we went back and forth. We were on the phone. We went back and forth on email. We have to play this. We have to play that. Don't forget this. And then I do love, and this was my idea, maybe that's why I love it, is I love the ones, and I heard you guys mention this as well in your inaugural podcast. I love the ones we did where we compared background singers that you don't know sing background, but are lead singers. And then Adam remembered all the songs he sang on, but wasn't either credited on or was credited and kind of got lost in the thing. We know the bigger ones, right? And the Wallflowers and the Ryan Adams record, and lately a lot of my friends, like he's on the Sausage record, he's on Kellogg's record, he's on the Fantastic Cat album, as I mentioned earlier, Sean Barna. But these were earlier; these are things I hadn't heard. So. And it was cool stumping him, that Cher sings on, an old, whatever, you know what I mean? Or that there's, what's her face is on an Elton John song. So things like that was really fun to do. And I could see his face just light up during those. So those are probably my favorite episodes. And then the ones, like I said, like we just stumbled on a record that we both love in real time and then start playing stuff from it. And also one last thing, if you listen, and as you know, if you listen to the whole thing, we did one episode in which towards the end, they had just re-recorded August and Everything After, or they recorded it for the first time in London. He just got the stem from it and he goes, "Let me call them and see if we could play it." And I had not even heard it. So let me tell you, there was many chills over the years sitting with him and talking music or his career, his writing style, whatever. But that day when he played it and we both sat there and listened to the final mix of it and then put it in the podcast and talked about it was super, super cool. I forget what episode that was, but I guess you have to listen to them to find out.
Yeah. Chris, do you have any questions about some of the ones that you listen to?
And first of all, I will. It's one interesting. I think the song August and Everything After is such an interesting thing because I remember like the first time when you played that on piano in like 2003, late 2003, and just like the wave, if you could like gauge the excitement of people reading a message board together, like the idea that he played it, and then of course the fact they recorded it so beautifully. Like I said, the backing vocal one I think is incredible. I think it's it's kind of one of those things that as a music fan, you hear all sorts of different things. You hear Adam's take on things. And again, that's one that's really interesting because, I mean, all of this is his take and his perspective on things. But as a backing singer, that is something where his take on those other songs is so fascinating to hear from a sort of professional and who's done it to break down these classics or maybe lesser known songs. So that's one I always recommend to people if they're looking for something to start with. By
the way, Dusty Springfield is the person that sang. That bothers me. I couldn't remember her name. And also, I loved his breakdown of Jagger singing on "You're So Vain" is just
amazing.
It's
Yes.
great insight. That's what I'm saying. Once you get him start talking about singing, or even songwriting, we talk about how brilliant bridges are, or certain, harmonies that are used and why they're used. We did a whole episode on the Cars when what's his face died, Rick Ocasek
Yep.
died,
Mhm.
and we did a whole episode on which he didn't really want to do at first because it's a tough one. It was about mental illness when Daniel Johnston died, but he loved Daniel too, and that was a tough one for both of us. I think we were uh, fighting the emotions during that, but I like those tribute ones too.
Yeah. I also really love there's a record, that band, the Blue Nile, is one of those that
Yeah,
because I learned a lot of these about newer artists and right who Adam's been listening to and through the Outlaw Roadshow too in the past. So it's always interesting to hear like what new artists are doing. But that was one where I was like, how have I never heard this record before? And it's also interesting hearing because I was talking to Chris Porterfield. He's a huge Blue Nile fan. And he's like, I had no idea Adam was such a like this is um
cool.
actually the really interesting thing there is that I just want to connect something earlier because you said you was thinking about the gated drums and stuff on the original demo. It's kind of the Blue Nile, right? And it's like that's also an influence in a certain way. It's like that. It's almost you could trace that demo back to influences that were kind of getting shed, but they're all anyway. Just
Yeah.
thinking out loud there about that
No,
one.
it's true.
Yeah.
Yeah, I remember the first time I asked Adam general questions like, "Well, what are your favorite albums?" And he said, "I always like to say, Blue by Joni Mitchell, Kind of Blue by Miles Davis, and the Blue Nile, whatever record that is, because I want it to all be blue."
Right.
It's a great line. Yeah, that was, and I remember one of the things we did was we put out a note because he couldn't find his gnarled bootleg version of something, and we ended up finding it for him.
Oh.
Yeah, it was kind of cool.
I'll have to try to find the title of that episode with the background one for the Underwater
I
Sunshine.
did. There's three of
I'll
them. I think we did it 3 times.
Yeah,
okay.
We loved it. Yeah, he named them all these weird. He would always name them. So
Right.
he named them all these weird things. So, and we didn't number them either because back then we didn't know. Like it's more important that you number them, like episode 128. Because
Yeah.
people ask me what episode. Episodes are the punk ones because every year
right.
for this Pingree school in high school in private school here in New Jersey, I do a tour of the East Village. They do this history of music in the 1970s. So I do this tour of the East Village, and I said, you guys should play that you should make that part of the course is to have them listen to this because we go through everything, and they're like, okay, what episodes? And I'm like, the episodes where we did the punk thing.
Says punk in the title, maybe.
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 Well, I'll use one of Chris's comments as you gave me a good segue, Chris, which was that we did interview Chris Porterfield, and one of the reasons we did that, I mean, of course, he toured with them since we had some memories and stories about that. But one of the reasons I wanted to do it was I think one of the Counting Crows' legacy among bands, right? Maybe the general public will not think of this, I don't think, but is obviously like mentoring, getting so right. He's into supporting other acts and trying to get other people to, whether it was when he started his labels, whether it's that I told someone recently, I said, he comes out, I think basically every time right before opening acts and says, "Hey, I'm Adam. Listen to this. This is really good. I've selected
Sure
this.
does.
I love them."
Yep.
And of course, the other, and where I'm segueing into is what you're very involved in, is the Underwater Sunshine Festival. So please maybe talk about that legacy. And then also, please, I want to plug the Underwater Sunshine Fest, which is going to happen this year, I saw. So
Yeah, 17th and 18th of October, I believe.
Mhm.
Yeah. We're going to announce it soon, but I guess I just did. Yeah, I think we're going back to the Bowery Electric there in the Village. So a couple of things. One of the things that Adam told me right off the bat, one of our first conversations, is the very first tour when they started to blow up and they brought all these people on. He was really brokenhearted because the people that used to see them before Mr. Jones hit or the album started to sell ridiculously, is that he loved the fact that they would bring, the kind of audience they would get were open to new things, and Counting Crows were doing new things. They were extemporaneously changing things and alt lyrics and and expanding songs and it was great, and he loved that. And then as they became bigger and bigger, people were not interested. They were not only not interested in the opening bands, but they weren't interested in hearing anything but Mr. Jones. And that's like a real revelation, part of the whole, wow, we're in a different world right now. But Adam has always said, and it's so true, when you're music geeks like us, and we almost started like this music geek club where I was going to do this website and put all this stuff that we were trying to promote. And that's essentially, I mean, when you think about Underwater Sunshine, just the title of it, which is the title of a covers record where he covers all these songs by people he respects, people he knew, or people he respected or were influenced by. And he wanted to get it out there as opposed to just covering like a Stone song or a Beatles song. And so he immediately wanted to call it that. It grew out of the Outlaw Road show. So when I first met Adam in late 2016, he invited me to come hang out, and Rob Thomas played it, and he got on stage, and the two of them, it was hilarious. They were drinking and singing songs. It was fantastic. And I met a lot of the people I would go on to meet for Underwater Sunshine. So that kind of fell by the wayside. And in the interim, while we started doing the podcast, everybody who produced it went to our producer Barbara's wedding, and Adam was in the wedding. And during that wedding, they decided, why aren't we doing a festival? And Adam's like, let's call Underwater Sunshine and we'll play all the music and promote it. So that was very organic that way. And the real shame of it, the real heartbreaking shame of it was in 2020, we were going to expand to at least two venues, because the first couple of years was it was so successful. We did two of them. I think we did two of them in 2018. We did one in 2019. We did one in the fall of 2018. Then we did one in April of 2019 that Cyndi Lauper sang in, and she came on stage. And then we did one in the fall of 2019, and we were going to expand to 2020. And Counting Crows was going to kick off the week by playing the end of their tour, and they were going to play like another venue, but they were going to promote it, and it was going to be all about Underwater. It was just huge. Frank Turner was going to play, and then he was going to headline. All this stuff was happening, and then bang, the world shut down. The world shut down when I was in the studio with Counting Crows in Brooklyn when they were recording Butter Miracle. I'll never forget. It was my mother's birthday. It was March 12th, and we were sitting in there, and the guys in the band were trying to get the hell out of there because they wanted to get to the airport before it was shut down. I remember them grabbing their bags and saying, goodbye, I got to get out of here. And me and Adam and their managers are like going over their phones going, Pearl Jam just canceled their entire tour. Blah, blah, blah just canceled their entire tour. It was just like everything was just completely imploding from the time I showed up at like 11 a.m. till the time I left the studio at 4 p.m. The world was different. It was like I walked into that studio with those guys, listened to them do some playbacks, a couple of, Adam sang a song, and then I left and the world was different. And that was really the end, we thought, of the festival. But to Barbara's credit, to Adam's credit, to everybody, I'm going to miss people, Ehud and Lindsay and everybody who works on the damn thing. Diego, Felipe Molina, who did some Counting Crows covers, all of them worked so hard to get this thing, resurrect this thing. Zoe, everybody, and I'm proud to be friends with those people and to do that festival every year. And we do, as you guys know, free. Everything's free. Adam gives, lets his apartment be used for like sort of like a band hang, and people do these garden sessions that go on YouTube. So you get to see the bands interact acoustically. We used to record the podcast from there, but since we're not doing the podcast, we didn't do the last couple. And then we did. Jesse Malin let us use Berlin one year to do the garden session. So it's really a big family, and we buy all the merchandise for the bands, and they play, and it's free. I mean, what are you going to do New York City free? Those things never go together. Ever.
It's incredible. Yeah, that's one of the things. It's completely free. You can go and grab some merch. If there's a CD you like, you can go have it, and put it in your car and drive around with it. I've done that many times. It's a very, very cool. If someone's never gone before, it's a very, very cool thing.
Have you guys been there? Yeah. Have you guys?
Yeah, I went to a number of Outlaw Road shows, and a number of Underwater Sunshine festivals. Obviously there is a different air in the room when the Crows do show up and play together. That is something in a room that small where everyone's like compact and tight against each other.
Yeah.
It is something to see, having seen them in obviously the biggest possible venues, to be like in a room that tiny. Those are some of the most memorable shows. And really like the lineups, right? Because especially when the lineups hit and it really hits you, we all go through phases, but you'll have a night where it's like, oh shoot, it's Daniel and the Lion and Fort Francis, and you're like, wow, I both like saw a band I loved and learned about a band I loved and like fell in love, all these different things where you just develop these relationships because you're Titan. It's handpicked. Everyone's good. Everyone's at the very least worth seeing. Some you'll connect to more than others. But yeah, I saw Fort Francis there for the first time when I've seen Fort Francis, I don't know, a dozen times since then.
Yeah, and David was nice enough to play that. I was telling you guys before we went on the air, he was nice enough to play Hey Jude at the event I did with Adam and Rob Sheffield from Rolling Stone, and Stephen Kellogg was there, and Matt Sushers played, and he got everybody singing the na-nas at the end. It was great. And if you have a chance, anybody, check it out on YouTube. It was from Rockwood. It was from late 2022, and Adam is fantastic. He's hilarious in that, and we talk about music and songwriting, and Paul McCartney. He tells great Paul McCartney stories, so it was a lot of fun. Yeah, David's great, and I love Fort Francis. They're fantastic.
Yeah, and of course, do you have a favorite's probably strong, but anyone where you're like of the Underwater Sunshine artists in the last couple of years, you got to go hear them.
Not fair. That's not fair.
Because you love them all.
No, right? I love them like my children. Yeah. Well, I've become very close with Sean Barner over the years. Yeah. I went to go see Counting Crows during the lockdown when they played in Austin a few years back. And you couldn't get it backstage, so I couldn't see them, I remember I went to the soundtrack and Adam just waving for me, and it just felt so weird. But Sean and the band, we all went out drinking and hanging out. I love Sean. Matt Susage, like I said, he did me the greatest favor playing for my event at Rockwood. I really adore Pedal. I got to bring in Elizabeth and the Catapult. I love Elizabeth Zeman. We've done some things together. I got to bring my friend Eric Hutchinson there to headline one year. Eric and I go all the way back to 2006. So I got my Gina Royale this year, somebody I discovered. There's so many different. Yeah, it's just hard to do. They're all great in their own way, and it's like you're right. You're absolutely right, Chris. It's very diverse. You'll get funk, you'll get pop, you'll get folk, you'll get female singers and macho singers and rock and all that stuff. It's all in there, man. It's cool.
Yeah, it's actually, I think it's an interesting prism for Counting Crows fans, because for those who've gone, right, we'll all talk and everyone has a good time, and then you'll find out, you're like, oh man, I love that band. You're like, oh, that band, oh, they were fine, but I really love them. You're like, you love, okay, and it's like this interesting, like, divergent point of like because in some ways it's like the lens on everyone's. The Crows bring so much of it together, right? That it's like your lens on how you take and get into music, right? What parts of it you love and what parts move you. It's kind of an interesting way to have that conversation, to be like, oh, we've got all these bands that are all good, but like, what about this moves us?
True.
Yeah, and just I definitely want to get out there. I've been on the West Coast since you started the Underwater Sunshine Fest. So just so you know, Chris is not morally superior. He lives in the New York metro area, so it's easier for him to go. But I do. In fact, I made a joke that I said maybe we should do a Sullivan Street meet and greet. Maybe not this fall, but the next fall. But yeah, for those, just to give it another plug, Underwater Sunshine Fest. Yes, it was already announced. James, okay. on social media. There is a website, underwatersunshinefest.com, that actually says 18th and 19th. You can put your name in for updates. There's also Instagram account, Facebook account, and an X account. So lots of social media to keep track of the festival. But I definitely want to go now that I'm all in Counting Crows because of the podcast. Now I have like an obligation to go to these things, right?
Good. So. Yeah, and Adam's there. He hangs out. He sees all the bands. He announces some of them. The two of us, I think we did like a 20-minute chat. And that ended up online somewhere before it happened. And then, we both introduced different bands and everybody's there. It's a real community in every sense of the word. It truly is. And it all emanates from the Crows and what Adam puts in, but all the people I named, and I hope I didn't leave anybody out, do a great job. Way better than me. I'm just hanging on the tiger by a tail kind of thing.
In some ways, it kind of reminds me, which I didn't go to any of those shows either, but when they used to do the Shim Sham shows, right? 'Cause it was like an annual thing that involved, involved other artists and everything like that.
Less tequila.
Right, less tequila.
a little less tequila, but
and additional age. Well, let's use this time to at least give some plugs to, for people that are fans of yours, James, or want to know more or want to read more of things that you've done. I told you in the pre-show that your Amazon web pages seem to be, or author pages seem to be split in two, not by your choice, but yes, it's the same James Campion. And they seem to segregate two different, but if you looked it up, you can see them all. But in musically, we'll just talk about the music books, and you can add if I'm missing some. But in 2015, you had Shout It Out Loud, the story of Kiss's Destroyer and the making of an American Dream. And then 2018, like you already said, Accidentally Like a Martyr, Warren Zevon book. And then the most recent book, let's plug that, Take a Sad Song, The Emotional Currency of Hey Jude. So it's a book of just one song, and this was named one of Rolling Stone's top books about music in 2022. So don't just take our word for us for it. Take Rolling Stones. Still available in hardcover. And in fact, as the irony I know was not lost on you, of course, that in their review they said they kind of. I think they did this on purpose, I'm guessing, but that Hey Jude has, why does it deserve its own book? Well, one reason is that it has the most memorable na 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 chant since the Long December. So that was great. And you are working on a book about Prince and the band. It's called Revolution, and currently due in 2025. I could be wrong, but and maybe you can tell me the timing. I actually thought one of the podcasts that I did listen to in Underwater Sunshine, just kind of they were released when I was available, was you did, I think, 3 or 4 more episodes on Prince.
We did.
After his passing. And I don't know what the timing was, if you started writing that after, but certainly the homework you did for those episodes helped write the book, I'm assuming.
Yeah, I mean, it helps when you've lived through it. Adam and I are both huge Prince fans. We had the experiences similar of being introduced to him and then him blowing up and different things. So we did, I think we did a 3 or 4 part series on early Prince. So we start with the second album, the eponymous is titled Prince, and then we end with 1999. We were planning on, eventually going through his other canon, as we rolled along in the podcast. But of course, as we say, COVID hit and we sort of truncated. I think that 97th episode we did a live stream. It's one of the last things I did in other people's houses before everybody just couldn't even leave your house. We were joking about touching our face and our ears and being too close to each other. It was very weird. But yeah, thank you for naming all those. Those are all my music books. Revolution book will probably come out in spring, hopefully. There's a little bit of a, corporate takeover. There's different publishers now involved with this book. So we'll see how that affects it. But just for Counting Crows fans and Adam's fans out there, Adam lends his voice a little bit to Accidentally Like a Martyr. He and I met or started working together on the book and then the podcast towards the end of my writing that. But he's all over Take a Sad Song. My idea with that book is to interview during the pandemic. I interviewed professors of different disciplines: sociology, musicology, history, philosophy, psychology, and songwriters of different genders and eras, and all the Beatle biographers or Beatle writers, biographers of Paul McCartney, getting them all in sort of a room, if you will, like we're doing right now through Zoom, and discuss why that song, I just picked that song because I loved it as a kid, why it works, why Paul McCartney seems to tap in, because he's done it more than any person in the history of popular music, into what we want to hear, what the ear wants to hear, like how the Beatles did it. And of course, Adam gave great insights to that. And he's in that book as well, which is one of the reasons why, and so is Rob Sheffield from Rolling Stone. And that's one of the reasons why I'm sure it got to the attention of Rolling Stone and that those guys helped me to promote it together. But yeah, that was a lot of fun. And I probably won't do a book like that again because one of the complaints even Adam had was like, there's not enough of you in it. And I was like, that's kind of true. I'm kind of like the ringleader in that. Okay, what do you think? Okay, what do you think? And so, but I thought a book like that needed to be written about why songs work, and who wrote more popular songs than the Beatles. Yeah,
I do think, by the way, I know this is a Counting Crows podcast and a music podcast, and you talked about music in your podcast, but maybe briefly talk about some of your non-music books. I actually think this is one of the purpose of the podcast, to get a little deep dive in Counting Crows related.
Sure.
So just a little bit, if someone wants to know what you've done or just if there's a certain thread or theme to your other authored work.
No, there is no thread until I got a music publisher that was interested in my music writing. I just wrote whatever jazzed me at the time. I have 2 compendiums of my published work. One is called Fear No Art, which has a connection to Adam because he apparently had a T-shirt when he was in Sordid Humor. When he saw that, before we met, he knew about it and he was like, I can't believe it. And my handle on Twitter is @FearNoArt. And he was so jealous of that. He was like, I can't believe you got it, Fear No Art. And that's another thing that we connected on. It was very weird, very serendipitous. And then there's another one called Midnight for Cinderella. And then in the interim, I wrote a book about my travels to Israel in 1996. I call it Trailing Jesus. So I went through and I found all these places where the historical Jesus was. And interestingly enough, I was there for a month. And during that time, it was the first time that Netanyahu was elected. So before that, no one knew who the hell he was. And I'll never forget that. And obviously today he's a major figure on the world stage. So, so that's what that book's about. And I wrote one novel called Why that came out prior to my work with Backbeat Books. And another book that Adam got a huge kick out of that we talked about, because it's really about what art is. You know, how do you define art? But it's a novel. It's funny. I try to be funny. It suffers from first novelitis. It's got too many ideas in it. So, but you might get a kick out of it. Some people have. But I'm not a fiction writer. So go ahead. Sorry.
Is there a thread, you know, with your music? You know, you said maybe not so much a thread with the non-music stuff, but where like the writing about Counting Crows fits in with the rest of your music writing? Is there something that kind of pulls that together in your mind?
Just that, and one of the things that Adam and I talked about from the very beginning is, unlike maybe other podcasts, and I don't begrudge them this, we decided if we didn't like something, we wouldn't play it or talk about it. We didn't play something and go, what the hell is this crap? You know what I mean? We would never do that. We grew up, that's one of the things that connected us again. We grew up in the early 70s when our radio stations, for him, it was KSAN out in the Bay. And for me, it was WABC radio here in New York, where they played everything back to back to back. You could hear Deep Purple and the DeFranco Family. You could hear the Partridge Family and, the Rolling Stones. You could hear Stevie Wonder and the Jackson 5. It was one after the other, after the other, after the other. And so we were steeped. We were bred with this idea of if it's good, it doesn't matter what the genre is. There was no deconstruction. That's what we talked about in the Prince podcast. Okay, this is black music. This is rock white music. This is this kind of music, prog music or punk music. We talk about in the punk podcast. Oh, all of a sudden punk it was supposed to be free and express yourself any way you want. Then it became, if you don't have the right haircut, you can't be part of this. So, we've always been very open-minded about that stuff. So it's one of the things I try to bring to my music writing, and I never try to stay in one decade or one style or one thing. I really wanted the Adam book to be the book that followed the Kiss, the Zevon book. But because of everything that's happened, not only the pandemic, but also, just the process of putting this book together, it's so vast, and him putting his 2 cents in, that I've, now written 2 books since. And so, it would be my 190s book, because so far I've covered something in almost every decade. But that's really, the connection there is the kind of thing that I love about Counting Crows. They play good music. You can't really pinpoint it. You want to call it roots music. You want to have, it's got a little bit of Van Morrison. It's got a little bit of the band. It's got a little bit of the soul. But it's got a little bit of Dylan, but it's indefinable in the sense where it's just good music. And so that's why they're my favorite band. And yeah, I just love talking about them. So
I was curious about that. That's interesting that you actually said your favorite band, right? Because they could be in your top 10 or that you just love them. But I didn't hear you say that before. So that's interesting.
Well, I have, but like all music writers, I have an asterisk.
Right.
And that is, so I had this thing. The Rolling Stones are my favorite band of all time. Like if you put a gun to my head, or I'm on the way to some island, you're going to dump a bunch of records, I'd probably pick Stones records. But there was a period in my life, as when you're younger, you're like, this is my favorite band right now. And that was like U2 and then REM, you know what I mean? These periods, the Public Enemy and then Green Day. So I remember at one point, the last, this is my favorite band, was Counting Crows. I think it was probably after This Desert Life, around that time when I was like, you know what? Holy crap, this is my favorite band. And I've never not seen them when they came around. I wrote about them even before I met Adam, and I extolled their virtues to everybody. And that idea of serving the song, every one of those guys. And I've gotten to know them personally, and even the new guys in the band, and they're just great musicians that love songs and music and melody. And like I was telling you guys, my relationship with Immer has reached epic proportions now, which is dangerous and fun all at the same time.
Yeah, maybe you'll write the David Immer Gluck Encyclopedia of Music with him. Because Immer once a year there's just like a dump, and it's like Immer's favorite records from this year, and it's like 50 entries.
Oh, I get that. Yeah, I get it, and I have to listen to them all. Otherwise, I have a text. I can't from my phone. I have a text from him like yesterday. He just did this project. I want to plug it. He just did this project for another band. and they covered a Little Feat song. I
Okay.
think it's supposed to be a tribute record to Lowell George.
I heard something about that record. I didn't realize that me was on it, actually.
Yes. So here we go. Imrig look. He says, he sends me the links, and he says, this just came out. I did 2 trains coming with my buddy Chris Siegfried. Check it out. 2 trains running. It's from Long Distance Love, a sweet relief tribute to Lowell George. Okay. So I'm just, then we go in a series of texts back and forth. And then after I listened to it, I said, I wrote, let me see. I know this is really deep insight stuff. So I said, I totally love it. It's that little, it's got that Skunk Baxter sleaze, excellent work. And then I wrote, is that on a Little Feat record? And he writes, you don't know the Little Feat album Dixie Chicken? Essential.
That's probably why Adam and Emmy. Although you can joke with Adam that if you don't get the podcast started again, you might have to do Underwater Emmy for a while or something like that.
That would never. I tried to get Adam to get these things under 2 hours, and he'd be like, "It's as long as it's going to be." And then, we had Immer on one time, and it was like 6 hours. It's insane. It would never end. And there'd be drinking during it, so that would make it fun. But
I had a very long commute at the time. It was perfect. I could, I had like an hour each way, and so together, you've got
sweet.
like a whole day. Perfect.
I'm glad to hear that. Glad to hear that. Thank you for listening to all 97.
It's really interesting. When you were telling your story about your other books, I just had it really is such a cliche, but sometimes true, how that traveling, especially, I don't know, when you went to Israel in your 20s or whatever, that can really change your life. To me, it was Eastern Europe. And Adam, of course, traveling to Europe a couple times changed him. It was, how he met Anna, right? For Anna Begins. And I think even post, when they first got signed, he talked about some tour around Europe that changed him, because that's when he came back. They were superstars. So it's just, and by the way, going to Europe is what helped him write Butter Miracle, right? He said he might never even write again. So it just goes to show you.
Travel people out there.
Yeah. I like what you said.
General life advice from the Sullivan Street podcast.
Yeah, and if I know that people listen are in their 40s and 50s, so to get your children maybe to travel in their 20s would be good. And I agree with you, by the way, Jade. I actually think the band is more of a cast of all-stars than people realize. I just think the talent.
Oh my God!
It's just past and present.
Charlie is amazing, and. All the guitar players, everything that they do, all those guys are great, and they all do their own music, and they played some of it for me, and it's excellent. It's got tinges of Counting Crows, but other influences, and they just sound so good. They work the weaving of melodies and counter melodies in there, and Adam is so great at writing it for the spatial quality of it, and then his rhythmic. His sense of rhythm in singing is just non-parallel. So all those things are in there. That's why I love them. And by the way, I apologize. The guys decided now to mow my lawn. So
that's right. I can't hear it. And the harmonies, of course. They're,
oh my God! It's all over Hard Candy, certainly.
So speaking of which, I did tell you ahead of time, or requested, shouldn't say tell you, requested that if you could list your top 5 in backward order favorite Counting Crows songs. Now, James. Now, hopefully you noticed that I didn't say what do you think their best songs were, or their scripted. I said what are your 5 favorite. I didn't care how popular or unpopular the songs are. Right. So there you go. Please. I do want to hear.
Okay, so thank you. That is a good demarcation, especially for a music writer. I have my favorite top 200 songs on my website, top 200 albums on my website. My favorite album of all time, if anyone cares, is Captain Fantastic and the Brown Dirt Cowboy by Elton John. That's my favorite album of all time. Not a lot of people know that record. I absolutely adore it and still do to this day.
Great record.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, Someone Saved My Life Tonight is one of the all-time great songs forever.
It truly is. So what I did, because I don't want to be a wimp, like I can't pick my favorite acts or artists from the festival. I picked out my favorite song on each record.
Great.
Can we do that?
Yeah.
Sure.
Okay. All right. So we have time. All right. So, Raining in Baltimore is one of my favorite songs ever written ever. And I love the story behind that, and it'll be in the book, and I'm sure he's talked about it before, but it's stunning. And that got me through one of the darkest times of my life, and I was able to tell him that. And we talked about that song, maybe except for Mrs. Potter's, and maybe 2 other songs. We talked about that song. It kept coming up in some way, shape, or form throughout the year of us talking, and probably because of me. But I absolutely adore that song. I know it's just him on there, except for I think there's a little accordion on it later on. But it's just stunningly beautiful, and Raining in Baltimore. Yeah, but I did want to tell you. Go ahead, please. Go ahead.
No, I was just saying we talked about that song for a half hour in episode 20, which we that was the first episode we focused only on 2 songs. So we did about 30 minutes on Daylight Fading and 30 minutes of Raining in Baltimore. So
Bravo. All right, good. I feel like I'm among friends here. So
Yes.
I did want to tell you my Sullivan Street story, since the name of the podcast is Sullivan Street, and that's probably right up there on that record. There's not a bad song on that album, obviously, but so I'm on tour with these guys, and I'm in the last day, and it's my birthday. So it's 2000, it's whatever year I was on, 2018. So September 9th is my birthday. So it was the last day I was on the tour with them. We were in Syracuse, and I invited all my wife's family, because my wife's from Syracuse. And it was great. They treated them like $1 million. It was excellent. And we had a great time. But it was the last day. And the entire time I was with them for about 2 weeks, I kept asking them, can you guys play Sullivan Street? And no one would say yes or no. They just kept ignoring me. And I would sit in with Immer and Adam, and I opened my book, or our book, with the two of them sitting, planning a Counting Crows show. And that's like the first 20 pages of the book. And that is amazing. Like the two of those guys, they never play a song they played the last time they played the venue. They never played the song that they played the day before, except for the pockets, right? They got to play Rain King. They got to play certain things along December. But yeah, so the two of them back and forth. And every time I would say, and what about Sullivan Street? Can we? Nothing. Not even like a wink, or maybe next week or whatever. It was that and Mrs. Potter's. But finally, the last day of the tour, if you've ever been on a tour before, you see they put up all the times. Like at 5 o'clock you eat, at 5:30 you do the sound check, at 5:45 you have to be here, at 6 o'clock they have to be there. So everything is mapped out, and here's the songs, because every song has different tunings of guitars and different mic and everything. So they got everything down to a T. They put up, for my birthday, Immer and Adam planned this whole thing. They put up all the fake set list. They had the lighting guys, the guitar techs. They all looked at a fake thing so they could open
great.
with Sullivan Street. And all Immer said to me before I went out to sit with my family is like, "You better be in your seat when we start this show." And when they started playing Sullivan Street, I swear to you, the tears. It was just amazing. They didn't mention anything about me or anything, and it was a really great gift, great birthday gift.
That is awesome. Also,
great story.
This is one of their all-time great openers. As a song like that, that song opening a show is like a really spectacular experience.
So
it's
good,
very perfect.
I will share with you guys. Like I said, Adam sent me all or the guys that run the board. They sent me every show that I was on that tour, and I'll send you a copy of that show so you can hear that. That was really cool.
That was amazing.
And then, of course, they finally played Mrs. Potter's, and my daughter was there, and she had to go to the bathroom. So I left to go all the way backstage to take her to the bathroom, and I missed like half the song. And that song's like 12 minutes. Moving on. I'm Not Sleeping is my favorite song on Recovering Satellites. And when I tell you, this is another Adam story, we were doing the book, and I just looked at him, and I said, this might be my favorite song on the record. He goes, I knew you were going to say that. And I was like, why? He goes, I just knew. I knew you were going to say that.
Oh, cool.
And he would never tell me why. So apparently he knew that was my favorite song, but it's always been I love the lyrics of the song. Certainly. I love that Beatlesque thing that's going on in there. I love the crazy, weird strings in the like the bridge, and, just him getting just weird about like his dreams and his visions. And again, very much a dissociative disorder song. And it's beautiful. I love that song. I don't know what you guys feel about it.
And him knowing that about you actually is a sign that you're good friends, right? That he knows enough of your personality to know that you love I'm Not Sleeping, which would, for most people, not be the number one song from that album. So that's great.
Yeah, it was early in our relationship and working on the book, but later on he used to make the joke, and I think he probably made it a few times in the podcast. I love Brian Wilson. I got to interview Brian Wilson years ago. I'm a huge fan of the Beach Boys, that mid-period, the Smile stuff. So is he and Immer. We talked about that all the time. But anytime I had a chance to jam Brian Wilson in, it's like anytime I can jam Joe Namath into a football discussion, I'm going to do it. I love Brian. So he always makes fun of me. And that's very much of that period, that kind of Beach Boys, Brian Wilson style of like, what is going on with the bass line here? You know what I mean? It's completely different what's going on in the guitar parts. So good.
Good point.
I can see that now. It's sort of like a heavier Pet Sounds kind of.
Yeah, well, that crazy, crazy shit he's doing in Smile. Have you heard the Smile stuff that released? And it's funny, when I interviewed Brian, he said that he put out in the early aughts his own version of Smile, the way he heard it in his head. Mm-hmm. And then they released the Beach Boys version. So they cobbled them all. They had put versions in different, Smiley Smile and Flowers and a couple of these records, Surf's Up. But they put them all in. It's fabulous. That's one of them. As Immer would say, it's a mystical document. Mrs. Potter's Lullaby is my favorite song on an album that I might be my favorite Counting Crows record, is this Desert Life.
Yeah, that was our unanimous number one when we reviewed the album with some other fans. We didn't. It's the episode we didn't release it yet, but yeah,
it's the fans' fan, right?
Yeah.
It's the
Yep.
fans' fan record. It's weird that way.
And people just say their best. Yeah, exactly. It's fans record. Mrs. Potter's was our number one choice. Basically, everybody agreed, and we just said it's his best lyrics. Probably. Right?
The band is smoking. It's the first record Immer's on. Yeah, it's gorgeous. I love everything on Hard Candy as well, including the title track, which just is one of the great pop sounding songs of all time. But I put down here Carriage. You guys have me on because I'm working, I've worked with Adam and I know him, so it's a nice connection. So I'm trying to bring some stories to the table here. And he talked very deeply about Carriage, very deeply about it. And he hasn't gotten that far. I put everything he said in there about it, and I hope it makes it to the final book. But that was one of those days where we got deep into, his thoughts and his memories as a child, the idea of becoming a father, or the idea of understanding what a woman goes through in childbirth. It's just so gorgeous, that song, in every possible way. And I think it's one of his faves too. Hard song to do live, I think he's mentioned. So I love Carriage for that reason.
Great, thank you.
And beautiful, and the trumpet solo, if anyone's listening.
Oh yes, and that's one of those things too. The I brought up a song from the live Amsterdam record, which I absolutely adore. I love the version of Goodnight Elizabeth where he stops singing and everyone's just singing, and they're German. Yeah. It's fabulous. It's that kind of the song that transcends languages. That's what I was trying to say in Hey Jude. Whether it's Dutch or German or whatever. He did a song called Hazy.
Oh, I love that song.
Great song.
Love it.
And there's a whole story behind that, and I'm not giving that away. That's staying in the book. But it's about a relationship that he had, a very torrid, strange, painful relationship he had with a woman that he was very much in love with, who is also an artist. And that's every line of that song is their experience. And if you listen to it again, just picture that and try not to get emotional. It's amazing.
Oh, thank you. Yeah, I love that. I love that song.
It's gorgeous. Yeah. And he hates to play the piano by himself. He hates it. So for him to do that, there's a lot of courage in there. And I think about that when I listen to it. Washington Square, because the first thing I asked him when I interviewed him for that record, I said, have you ever read Henry James, Washington Square? And he said, no, I haven't. And he was playing it off. But then later on, he was like, did you have that key, teed up? Because, I'm a lit major and I read a lot. And I said, no, I honestly hear tinges of James's work in that. And since then, he doesn't see it. But then again, later on, well, first of all, Washington Square Park is my favorite place on planet Earth. I want my ashes to be spread there, where I used to take my daughter when she was a kid, and when I used to go when I was a young man. And it very much is a awakening of New York song. And I just love what Immer's doing on there. And whenever they play that live, it just kills me every time.
Yeah, that's awesome. I was there actually one of the. I think it's the first time they played it. It's like the first or second night was in Jones Beach in 2003, and that song's always kind of stuck with me. And
it's stunning,
beautiful song.
It really is gorgeous work.
Sort of about the same thing as Hazy, right? Sort of.
Well,
connected to a little bit.
Yeah, I think that is true. That would have been at the far end of what that situation was happening. But yes, very good. Yeah. I remember him saying he was walking around Washington Square and he had a conversation with her, and, he was kind of coming to grips. I love the idea that he just went to New York. He had never been to the East Coast for that amount of time, except for when he was a kid, and he lived in Baltimore and Boston, certainly. But and to write about the awakening of that, that record is silly with all that stuff, and I love it. God of Ocean Tides, another conversation that he and I had, breaking down that bridge part where he talks about the memories of a faded birthday party with the melted candle wax and the paper plates.
That's my favorite line in that song. It's genius. Yeah.
It really truly is. And yeah, so I hear these. That's what I'm trying to say. This is why I want to get for the world to read this book, because the stuff that I got out of him and the stuff that I learned and the stuff that I thought was that, and it was, and then other stuff that I didn't know that comes out really does add to listening to the music. That's what I got out of Greil Marcus when I was a kid. That's what I got out of Robert Christgau. That's what I got out of Dave Marsh. That's what I got out of all these people who wrote about music and interviewed these people, and they gave you an idea. They didn't give the full song away, because once the song's out there in the zeitgeist, it's yours. You get to interpret the way you want it to be. But there's stuff in there that they wanted you to know, you had to figure out. And peeling that onion with the songwriter, I didn't just do it with Adam. I got to Adam by doing that for a living. So when it got to him, I was in my, I don't want to say prime, because I hope I still got some fastball gone, but I felt like when we met, it was time to get down to business. And, for him to tell me these stories, and I don't even, if you look up one of my Counting Crows pieces, it's on I have a website, jamescampion.com, but you could also find them, just Google James Campion and Counting Crows, or Adam George and James Campion. And there's, the piece I wrote about, I interviewed him right after Somewhere Under Wonderland, and he talks about that song. And I think I put that conversation in the book. So I think it's from that. So you could easily read that without it coming out. And I love all of the Butter Miracle. I love the whole, he meant it as one whole thing. And I think it's very hard. I didn't hear it that way because I was in the studio. So I heard like the third song first, and the Rats one. And then I heard this. So, but now I just hear it as one whole thing. And it's just so great.
And I'll plug that you did I forget how many episodes, maybe 20, 30. You actually did there's the Underwater Sunshine Festival Artist Spotlight podcast. You had a bunch of them. One of them you interviewed Adam, and it was basically about Butter Miracle. So if they want your thoughts about it, please listen to that. I agree. I like what Adam said. One of the songs, of course, is from the artist perspective, one's from the fans' perspective. That's why I can't believe that that the hardcore fans, and maybe there's not enough, but don't get totally into Bobby and the Rat Kings, because that's the whole point, right? That you go to the show and you're watching one of your favorite bands, and you kind of hope that this moment lasts forever because it's escapism, and it's one of the few things that keeps drawing you back to the band, right? So, yeah.
Yeah, and it's everything that Adam loves about songwriting. It's building worlds, and building myths, and creating vibes, whether it's Palisades Park or the great references to amusement parks and Ferris wheels in his songs. And then, of course, that childlike wonder of the world, seeing it with just a slanted head, as he used to say about, listening to Talking Heads or Revolver by the Beatles. If you just tilt your head a little bit, you'll get it, And that's why I feel about his songs. And I feel that when you listen to, Bobby and the Rat Kings, or some of the stuff that's on there, you're taken right to the second side of, East Street Shuffle. His worship of Springsteen, and how he builds geography and myths into his songs, or what he loves about Van Morrison, or what he loves about Dylan, or what he's been able to gather from all these people that he, thinks, we talked about Lou Reed, David Bowie, and that whole glam period. And that's what one of those songs is about. It's about that whole period of just like, this androgyny, this getting lost in different personalities, and letting the music take you away. And bravo if you can capture that in 5 minutes.
Thank you. I know I want to just I'm going to wrap things up fairly soon, only because I want to leave it in a way that you'd want to come back on again.
Let's geek it out. Yes.
I could talk to you forever. I did have one somewhat indulgent question to ask. Part of this is a music hypothesis, and also I have some personal, because I like this other. Now you mentioned that, and again, I didn't listen to all the episodes of Underwater Sunshines, and I will at some point. That you don't like to badmouth any bands, and right, you keep things positive. Sometimes I've heard Adam interviewed a lot and on your podcast about his influences and all these 70s and 80s and even 60s influences on his work, and he has such great takes on it. Sometimes I feel I haven't heard enough about his takes about his 90s contemporaries, and I'm not talking about Pearl Jam or that kind of thing. So one that I always wanted to know, because when you mentioned some things that you like particularly about Adam, is kind of why I like Billy Corgan. I always wanted to hear what his thoughts were on the Smashing Pumpkins, because I see a lot of personality similarities, which is like even this week, because it comes up in my feed. Now I like the Crows more. I'm more of a Crows fan, but just this week, Billy told his fans, like, do you realize how good Taylor Swift is? Like, she's an amazing, right? And Adam got into that like a year ago about how great Taylor Swift was. They've both wrestled with, like, they didn't just want to be a greatest hits and were kind of resentful of the fans for a little bit. And now both of them have a nice balance where they say, okay, we're going to play some of the greatest hits. We're going to play some deep cuts for hardcore fans. And we're also going to introduce new songs. And not a lot of bands do that. I remember seeing Fleetwood Mac when they were kind of in their like post boom, and they basically only played greatest hits and maybe one new song, right? That's one thing I like about them. Both are pretty stubborn and have done a lot of hard right turns. Like Adam's like, yeah, I could keep making August, but I want to challenge myself, and that's what he wanted to challenge. And so anyway, I just anyway, I don't know if you've ever made, but I kind of, maybe if you do the podcast again, I'd love to hear, or even, I don't know, Dave Matthews Band, which is not, the jam band, but I've just never heard him talk. Now, of course, they couldn't influence him as much because they were contemporaries, but anyway, I don't know if you have any thoughts about that.
I do one thought, and I will say that if you ever stumble on the conversation of Kurt Cobain with Adam,
yes,
there's a nerve there for certain. They were on the same label, they had the same management or agency or something to that effect. I could hear him correcting me now if he's listening. They had the same battle with, some mental issues of wanting to be famous or how they would be famous. They wanted their music to be heard, but there's a lot of stuff that goes with that.
Yes.
And the couple of times that he did meet Kurt, and what he felt about him and that music was seminal to him. I don't think there's any question about it. I think it was very influential, and it was very inspiring. And also it lent itself to sort of a cautionary tale for him. And there's many more. He's talked about Radiohead and wanting to get, the guys who worked on Radiohead to come and work on stuff. Obviously, he loved Cracker and
that's true.
They loved Camper Van Beethoven and so many of the artists that he had open for them. Obviously, he's a huge Big Star fan. First thing he gave me was a collection of Big Star stuff. I think we were working together for about 2 weeks, and he bought it for me and handed it to me. So that's what we do. People like he and I, or other people that we call ourselves music geeks, we just want to turn people on to the stuff that we're listening to. And that's all we've tried to do with that podcast. And that's really been our bond beyond working on the book. And even now, it's very rare I'll ask him about Counting Crows stuff specifically, unless I want to get, into the show or see everybody backstage or something. But it's very rare. We are always talking about other people's music. Yeah. Have you heard this? Have you heard that? I just sent him the St. Vincent record, the new one. A link to that, which I think is just great. Other stuff that's come up, which I think are, very important records. Rosie Tucker, I just did a piece about Rosie Tucker. And they're a binary artist that I just reviewed in Brooklyn. I'm going to go see Fantastic Cat right when we're done here.
Tonight, yeah.
Great.
Yeah, and he might be there, because he supports all the music. But Chris, yeah, I would say probably Nirvana. Top notch.
That's funny. And I did hear him talk about that a couple times. Chris, any last questions for James for this particular episode?
No, I think we've covered a lot of ground, and I thank you so much for doing this, and we'll cover more ground hopefully in the future.
Yeah, now that we got all my mishigash out of the way, I'm hoping that, we'll be able to, the next time, if you'll have me on, we could just dive deep into Counting Crows stuff and just talk about like the songs and break down lyrics and have fun with that. I'm still at the core a huge fan, and I thank you guys for doing this. I'm always bopping around my podcast and finding out, is there a Rolling Stones podcast? Is there a Dylan podcast? And there's 1,000 Beatle ones, and I know because I was on like 150 of them because I was promoting my book. But yeah, thank you for doing it. It's a great listen. You guys are super cool, laid back, and you love the band, and you could tell just by listening. And I'm going to listen to all the episodes. I will make a tontine with Eric. He listens to the Underwater Sunshine. I'll listen to 20. He listens to 97.
Okay, that's
not fair.
That's fun. No, it's funny you said that because I think I used Dave, and I don't know if they're still all going on, but I think as a random, I just thought of Dave Matthews, and I Googled, and they had like 6 podcasts, and I was actually thinking about some other creative outlets, and then I thought, and I used to do some radio, and then someone even kind of hinted. They said, is there a Counting Crows? I said, I don't think there is. And then I got a hold of Chris, and we just knew that we would have good chemistry, and we said, let's do it. Let's jump at it. So
there's more than enough to talk about. So
very cool. You absolutely with that band. Yeah. You guys got a lot of work to do. So
scratching the surface.
Please have me on again. Thank you so much. Thank you for everybody listening to the podcast that read my work and everything. And I hope to see you at the festival in October.
Thank you.
Of course.
Thanks,
Peace.
James. We'll definitely have you back down here on Sullivan Street.
Thank
See you next
both.
time.
Peace.
Thank you. Yep.